It's obvious that Xi Jinping is positioning his chess pieces in preparation for war. He's directed his military to be prepared to take Taiwan by 2027, and folks, that's only 2 years away. Now, it's true that does not mean that he will invade in 2027.
The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline, and that they are an inevitable rise. Now, they already are. If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not. Everything from the blood pressure medicine we take to what movies we get to watch, and everything in between, we will depend on China for it. They have come to dominate the critical mineral industry supplies throughout the world. Everywhere in the world, they've now established critical mineral rights. Even those who want to see more electric cars, no matter where you make them, those batteries are almost entirely dependent on the ability of the Chinese and the willingness of the Chinese Communist Party to produce it and export it to you. So if we don't change course, we are going to live in a world where much of what matters to us on a daily basis, from our security to our health, will be dependent on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. That's an unacceptable outcome of the century. I really do. I think the 21st century will be defined by what happens between the United States and China. The Chinese have basically concluded that America is sort of a tired great power in decline, that they are on a path over the next 20 or 30 years to naturally supplant us, irrespective of what happens. And I think their preference is to not have any trade and or armed conflict in the interim, because I think they might interrupt what they believe is a natural progression. I don't share that view. I think they have some significant domestic challenges.
A thought 4 years ago that was unthought by anybody. And of course, one of the most concerning things is Biden's weakness has emboldened the greatest adversary we have on the face of the earth right now, which is the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China is the head of the snake of this axis of dictators that are challenging the United States today. They're challenging our freedom, our security, and the very way of life we have. Beijing has had a direct hand in each of the problems I just mentioned. That's why addressing any one of them cannot be done without making sure that we are thinking about how we are deterring the People's Republic of China. When everything is a priority, nothing's a priority. And Senator Rubio, your top priority must be the People's Republic of China. Since the election in November, so this is all within the last 2 months, the PRC has hacked our Treasury Department, including CFIUS. Continue what has been described as the worst telecom hack in U.S. history. Sabotaged important undersea communication cables in Asia and Europe. Deployed ships to the South China Sea to harass our allies like the Philippines in their own territorial waters. Simulated a naval blockade of the Japanese islands for the first time. Conducted the largest naval drills in decades targeting Taiwan and the broader Western Pacific. Revealed new mobile piers suitable for a Taiwan invasion, unveiled advanced aircraft, and launched the world's largest amphibious warship, and they've allowed Iran to draw down and ship nearly 3 million barrels of oil from a storage site in China. It's obvious that Xi Jinping is positioning his chess pieces in preparation for war. He's directed his military to be prepared to take Taiwan by 2027, and folks, that's only 2 years away. Now, it's true that does not mean that he will invade in 2027, and it's also true that it's not predetermined, but it should be very concerning to all of us that he's given his military that direction. Because time and time again, dictators tell people what they're going to do, and then they go out and try and do it. The only thing that dictators respond to is force, strength, peace through strength. This was something Ronald Reagan understood a long time ago, and it's what we have to get back to in the United States. Xi Jinping is vowed to be the world-dominating power by 2049. We should take him at his word. That's what he believes he is going to try and do. It's time for us to go on the offensive and abandon illusions about what kind of adversary we're faced. This is not a managed competition. This is a competition we must win. It will take more than an all-of-government approach. It'll take an all-of-society approach to be able to win this. As our lead diplomat, Senator Rubio, you are in a position to set the tone. And that's why I can't think of a better pick to be the Secretary of State than you. So, first of all, do you agree that the PRC is the biggest threat that we face as the United States?
The Communist Party of China that leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book, about the 21st century. There's going to be some chapters in there about Putin. There's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places. But the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went. And I think you're alluding to it in your statement. I know you may have another question. I don't want to eat up all your time, but I do want to say this. The Chinese believe that the United States are a great power in inevitable decline and that they are an inevitable rise. Now, they already are. They're going to be a rich and powerful country, and we're going to have to deal with them. The danger is that because of our own actions, in many cases, a dangerous imbalance is built up in that relationship. We allowed them for years to pretend that they were some developing countries, so we should allow them to continue to cheat on trade and commerce. We should allow them to continue to expand. They lied about not militarizing and populating island chains in the South China Sea and the like. We allowed them for years before we got serious about it to conduct grotesque human rights violations against Uyghur Muslims, as an example. One of the most horrifying things happening on the planet. And for years, no one talked about it, which, by the way, not just has a human rights component to it, it allows them to use slave labor to produce goods that, at the expense of the rest of the world. Talk about not just a horrific humanitarian crisis, but an unfair trade practice as well. We've allowed them to get away with things. And frankly, the Chinese did what any country in the world would do given these opportunities. They took advantage of it. And so I think now we're dealing with the ramifications of it. I agree 100% what you said, but I remind you, and I remind everyone, I guess I want to make this point, that much of what we need to do to confront China is here at home. It's not just abroad, it's also here at home. We have to rebuild our domestic industrial capacity, and we have to make sure that the United States is not reliant on any single other nation for any of our critical supply chains.
And with 4 seconds left, how are you going to explain that to your average American, that we need this all-sized society approach, and your point exactly, that it needs to begin here at home, and so that people from my state, Nebraska, will understand and get on board?
If we stay on the road we're on right now, in less than 10 years, virtually everything that matters to us in life will depend on whether China will allow us to have it or not. Everything from the blood pressure medicine we take to what movies we get to watch, and everything in between, we will depend on China for it. They have come to dominate the critical mineral industry supplies throughout the world. Everywhere in the world, they've now established critical mineral rights. Even those who want to see more electric cars, no matter where you make them, those batteries are almost entirely dependent on the ability of the Chinese and the willingness of the Chinese Communist Party to produce it and export it to you. So if we don't change course, we are going to live in a world where much of what matters to us on a daily basis, from our security to our health, will be dependent on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. That's an unacceptable outcome.
Great. Thank you, Senator Rubio.
Out.
Very good. Thank you. Final question. The Chinese Communist Party, as you said in your testimony, has waged a deliberate campaign of economic warfare against the United States and our allies. We need to restore, as President Trump has said, reciprocity in that economic relationship and impose cost on Beijing for hurting American workers. How can the United States counter that campaign? How do you think about the economic tools that the administration can apply to cut off the flow of American capital and technology that supports China's geopolitical ambitions?
Well, and again, much of what it comes to trade and so forth in this administration will be handled through the Department of Commerce, but we'll certainly have an economic undersecretary and a whole entire bureaus that will be dedicated to what we can contribute to that endeavor. So I'll just share my views broadly on it. Number one, I think it would make common sense to everybody that if, by and large, a relationship in which their companies can do whatever they want here, but we can't do it there, is a pretty unfair relationship. And it's something we've allowed in the past for allied countries who were small, poor, and developing. That cannot continue, in my view, and I think that's the president's view. The second is there's much that needs to be done with regards here domestically. I think we once again as a nation, this is not a Department of State issue, but once again as a nation need to prioritize the importance of our industrial capacity and our access to supply chains domestically, especially in key and critical industries. Maybe not every industry, but some key industries. We should either have a domestic capacity or an allied capacity that's reliable and can't be used against us in a moment of conflict as leverage. The third point I would make is we need to be actively engaged in the world. As an example, the Chinese own significant mineral rights and mining rights in Argentina, in Chile, throughout Africa. It's one of the reasons why the polar region and the Arctic region has become so critical as well in that regard, is because they are scooping up all over the world these mineral rights, port rights, et cetera, that place us at an enormous disadvantage in the long term. And it's what I said in that short answer is if this trend continues, we are going to wind up living in a world where much of what we depend on for our security, our health, our safety, and our economic prosperity will largely depend on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. And that cannot be a world that we leave for our children.
Thank you, Senator.
Committee will come to order. We will continue on with our 10-minute rounds of questions, and by my list, the next person up is Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rubio, congratulations. I'm grateful for your willingness to serve our nation in this new role. Thank you as well for your family's commitment to continue with your service here to this country. I think President Trump made a wonderful choice in nominating you to be Secretary of State. Your extensive foreign policy experience and your deep understanding of international relations, I think, makes you a perfect choice for the position. While serving together in the Senate on this committee, I've seen firsthand your dedication, your knowledge, and your commitment to our nation's security. Your strategic insights, your principled approach to diplomacy, they're going to serve our nation well, and we do face many challenges. We've talked about them in the past, so you have my full and unwavering support. I wanted to start with China, because over the years we worked closely together to counter the significant threat that China poses to global security and to stability. The Chinese Communist Party's strategy extends far beyond traditional military conflict. They're conducting an aggressive campaign aimed at weakening American leadership and reshaping the global order to serve their own interests. Make no mistake, China is challenging our interests all across various domains, diplomatic, economic, technological. They're playing the long game, and I think we have to respond with equal resolve and a strategy. It's essential that we fully recognize the scope of the challenge and develop a strategy to safeguard American interests and the values on the world stage. So could you talk a little bit about your approach in addressing an increasingly aggressive China and how we and our international partners can hold China accountable?
Well, and as I pointed to earlier, it's an important question because I think it's definitional to the century. I really do. I think the 21st century will be defined by what happens between the United States and China. The Chinese have basically concluded that America is sort of a tired great power in decline, that they are on a path over the next 20 or 30 years to naturally supplant us, irrespective of what happens. And I think their preference is to not have any trade and or armed conflict in the interim because I think they might interrupt what they believe is a natural progression. I don't share that view. I think they have some significant domestic challenges. Nonetheless, I do think what we can't ignore is that at the current road that we're on right now is an unbalanced relationship, and that much of their growth and their progress has come at our expense, not because they outcompeted us, but because they frankly have violated the rules that they've benefited from but have lived by none of its obligations. So I think the first begins with a recognition that China is and will continue to be a rich and powerful country, and we will have to deal with them. It's in the interest of global peace and stability that we have to deal with them. By the same token, we cannot find ourselves in a situation in which we allow them to continue to flaunt the rules in order to undermine us economically and or industrially, nor can we allow them to undermine our alliances and our presence in different parts of the world. For example, I think it is clear that on that path towards what they view as their rightful place as the world's preeminent power, they want to establish preeminence in the Indo-Pacific. And that has historical ramifications or historical underpinnings because they view these smaller countries as tributary states, that basically all roads lead back to Beijing, and they view that. Unfortunately for them, their neighbors do not view themselves as tributary states. And this is particularly true in places like South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, but also Vietnam and others, some of whom have historical disagreements with China. So at the core of our strategy has to be twofold. Number one, ensuring that there is a proper geopolitical balance between the United States and China to avoid any sort of conflict that could be deeply destabilizing and worse for the world, but at the same time ensuring that it doesn't come at our expense, that we don't find ourselves in a world in which we are dependent on China, or any foreign power for that matter, for the raw materials that we need, for the ability to make medicine, for the ability to fuel our economy, the ability to feed ourselves or our people. We cannot be a country that becomes dependent on foreign powers, and so much of that involves not simply how we engage in the world, but also what we do here domestically. That is not the responsibility of the Department of State, but it is important for us to point to that much of what's happened with China, and much of what's happening now, is what we are not doing whether it's through our own industry and the development of our own industries, or access to raw minerals and raw resources that are critical to fueling and or building a modern economy.
You talk about China playing by a different set of rules, and they do the ones that we think of as traditional rules. But and I appreciated your comments to Senator Ricketts about China and even the definition of them as a developing nation. I think it's a big problem. They can't be allowed to continue to play openly with a different set of rules. In addition to the hidden rules, I oppose China exploiting its status as a, quote, developing nation within international organizations. I think it helps them gain an additional unfair advantage in what you described as this unbalanced relationship. China is not in any way a developing country. You just mentioned they're a rich and powerful country. That's not a developing country. It's the second largest economy in the world. Clearly has the financial resources and access to capital to meet its own needs. So I think we need to end China's preferential treatment and hold it accountable on the global stage. I mean, we see it in the World Bank, we see it in other locations. Are there things that we can do and you can do as Secretary of State to try to eliminate this unfair advantage that they have? It's an open unfair advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to, first of all, and I mentioned this in my opening statement, we have to acknowledge that many of the global institutions that were created not just in the post-war era, but the post-Cold War era have been weaponized against us. And I can use a number of examples. The first is, you think about the Security Council of the United Nations, which was created ostensibly for the purpose of preventing global conflict. Sadly, two of the greatest drivers of instability in the world today hold a veto vote at the Security Council. It's basically rendered the Security Council almost irrelevant. By the same token, I would say I am not against multilateral organizations so long as that or any foreign arrangement we have serves the national interest of the United States. I do not believe, and the President has made this abundantly clear, President Trump, that under no circumstances should any foreign entity or multilateral or international organization have veto power over the national security interests of the United States of America. The second point that I would point to is that the Chinese have very aggressively played this. They have figured out, and it isn't hard to figure out, that even the smallest nation state has a vote at the United Nations General Assembly. And they have worked hard to not just court, but entrap a handful of votes around the world, and including in our own hemisphere. If you look at the Caribbean Basin, in Grenada and places like that, where they go into these countries, and they don't just provide $1 million to $1 billion to build the stadium, they also give you $5 or $6 million under the table for your family and friends. They do that in place after place. We've seen that practice as well in Africa. So we need to understand that there has to be, in many of these parts of the world, look, we're not bribing anybody. We're not going to do that, and it's certainly illegal for American companies to do it. But it's hard to engage these countries who in many cases have legitimate needs when they say, the Chinese, we prefer to have your stuff, we prefer to have American investment, but you're not offering any, and so we're left with the only alternative, and that is to take the Chinese investment, even though it comes with strong strings attached that include things like debt diplomacy or debt traps and expectations of diplomatic cooperation at these.